Welcome to the CISO Perspective interview. I'm your host, Lorraine Smith. You can find our interviews on CISOstreet.com. And I'm happy to be here with Endre. He's been on several panels with me before and even attended a Shark Tank and participated in the Shark Tank that we did early this year or late last year. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Endre to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. My name is Endre Walls. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Customers Bank and Customers Bancorp. I am a father of four, and that's my second job, right?
Right.
And I just am very, very happy to talk with you about what's going on in my world and talk about the security space in general.
Good. You know, I'm thinking back on how we met, and you actually reached out to us. We launched CISOstreet last year as part of Excel, independent platform, thought leadership platform under Excellion. And you had reached out through the Contact Us feature in CISOstreet to participate in our end of year, which is the Trends and Predictions webinar. And I thought that was amazing, and I'm so glad that you did, because you've just been so, so interesting to me. I didn't know that you were a father of four, so that's why I love these interviews. I'm a mother of two, so two adult kids, which has its challenges in and of itself. But anyway, just so happy to have you here, and just interesting how paths cross. And your participation in our Shark Tank last year was fantastic. So really appreciate that. So yeah, talk to us about, Customers Bank is interesting because you service banks, right? And so talk to us just a little bit about where you are in the pandemic, and maybe tell the audience a little bit about Customers Bank. Tell us where you are. Are you back at the office? What's that look like for the organization?
Well, when how I like to describe our bank is sort of a mix of, we do a lot of commercial business, and so we help other companies be able to achieve what they need to through their financial goals. We also do consumer business and a lot on the high wealth side. And then the other thing that we do that we've just created a discipline for over the past year is PPP loans and helping companies get back on their feet during the pandemic. In order to be able to do that, we had to be 100% on the ball and ready to go from a technology and operational standpoint pretty much from the time the shutdown started. It just so happens that in December of 2019, my team does tabletop exercises with the entire organization. And for whatever reason, we had picked we made up a virus and picked a pandemic scenario to do our tabletop. It's so weird that was our choice of topic out of everything we could have chose. And because of it, I think the routines, the planning, the how to respond to different aspects of a pandemic were fresh in everyone's minds. So when we had to shut down in, I think it was February or March of 2020, everyone was prepared and we didn't miss a beat. The decision had been made to shutter all of our offices and just maintain our critical branch operations. And we were ready to go with signage, with the processes and procedures for our internal teams, with figuring out how to move certain specialized operations so that they could be done from home. And I think that was central to our success, because as soon as PPP started, the very first day we were able to start taking applications. And that's why I think now we're third in the country in PPP lending. And we've helped a lot of businesses be able to stay alive and keep their employees paid. So
that's amazing. I literally just before we started our interview here, I moderated a panel on incident response best practices. And one of the final tips because I had the panelists go around and say, 3 things that they can recommend to be better prepared. And one of them said, train as if it's a real incident. And that's how you're going to be prepared, because you're always going to fall back on what you know. And wow, you had a lot of foresight to do that.
tabletops are extremely comprehensive. We've even done ones where when we were in person, someone would get handed a piece of paper and that piece of paper would say, "You're dead." So they can't speak anymore. And now, even though they're sitting in the room, you got to count on the other folks, the next man up, if you will, or woman up, to be able to say, okay, from this standpoint, now that so-and-so is gone, I've got to do X, Y, and Z. I've got to align the teams this way, that sort of thing. And while it, in the moment feels a little morbid and weird, I think the lessons learned and the development of that security aware culture just reverberates throughout the entire bank. And it's not just senior leaders that we do these tabletops with. We choose our senior leaders and department heads, and we also have some other folks from within the bank who are in our line operations, in our branch operations, and our customer service side or relationship management side. Everyone gets involved in those. We usually have about 45 to 50 people in exercise. Yeah. And the whole reason is to get everyone acclimated to the idea that things go wrong. Yeah. Like that's the point of doing exercises. Right. Yeah.
That's great. So how did you get your start in cybersecurity?
So it's interesting. I started my career in IT almost 24 years ago at this point. My very first job, I was a hardware technician at David Michael, which is a Briar's division. And my job wasn't even to fix the computers. I was the guy who took the broken computer off of your desk, put the working one on your desk, and then made sure everything was okay, and then put it back in the cart and took it to people who fixed it. And that was literally my job. Okay. So I started out that way and continued to grow. I think security started becoming real for companies probably a little bit before 9/11. Was when companies started realizing that this isn't so much about kids on their couch just trying to destroy data or replace your website with porn. That now there's a real appetite for stealing money, for stealing secrets, for stealing information. And while it was happening before then, it was always the large companies that were affected. It was never the mid-market players, never the small companies. And then it started to become everyone. And so my first job in security was designing networks, secure networks for companies that were clients of the company I worked for at the time. And the job there was, create a network that people just can't infiltrate. And so, it was about GRE tunnels and IPsec connectivity to create WANs. And back then we didn't have, the semblance of multi-factor authentication. Back then it was AAA, right? Mm-hmm. So we used radius servers and TACACs, and we used RSA keys. And, it was a very interesting time because there was a lot of fear, which created this sort of sub-industry, but not a lot of understanding. And that created a great deal of opportunity for me to be able to grow because it wasn't a well-defined industry. It was an industry that was still within IT and still had these little pieces that you could create for yourself. And so it allowed me the freedom just as a future executive to be able to understand the ins and outs of how to secure an organization, not just the tech, but the people and all of the pieces in between. And I think being able to get that education hands-on as opposed to anywhere else really helped me define where I am and who I am today.
That's really good. That's interesting. Yeah, I definitely, rolling up your sleeves, that's the best way to learn in so many cases, right? And it's interesting. We have kids, I've got adult kids. My youngest is sort of the millennial age, and they get out of college and they just want to go straight to the top. And we have social media. We've got my nephew actually, he was 17 when this happened. One of his friends was in a Fortnite tournament, and won like $6 million as a 16-year-old kid.
Mhm.
And that's the role model that my nephew has. And he's like, oh, I don't want to go to school. I'm just going to, play video games. I'm just like, what? And they just have a different mentality. And they think that they can go from A to Z and not do a lot of the hard work. And of course, I'm generalizing. It's not everybody, but it's just an interesting thing, that's happening now. And yeah, and you've got to do the work in order to get the experience.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So talk about, you've been a CISO and securing organizations for a long time, and the big challenge, as we all know, in this world, in the cyber world, is protecting the balance between protecting the business but keeping it running at the speed of business. And I once had our CEO actually says there's a lot of psychology involved in being a CISO, of relationship building. So talk to us about that and how that's important and what you do to kind of run that, or like walk that fence.
Yeah, that there's no truer statement that there's a lot of psychology involved. I think, and that's why I keep talking about the idea of security culture, right? And making people aware not only of the risks, but I think also aware of how everything plays into each other. I think the average user experience is I sit down, I use my computer, I click on this thing and something happens somewhere else, and all, the points from A to B and C and D don't really matter to me. It just, the end result is what I need, right? When you build a security culture, people are aware of where their data goes, and they understand what happens when it gets there and how it gets processed and how it comes back. And everything that can happen in between becomes super important to them, just as a matter of how they do what they do on a daily basis. So you do have to be able to speak the language of individuals. I find that Myers-Briggs is a really good resource, not only for team management and understanding everybody in your team, but understanding those 16 archetypes and how people fit in, be able to understand the cues, and then that helps you communicate properly with those types of folks. Some folks need to be scared, right? So you got to give them all the scary. Some folks need the ins and outs so that they understand the system approach, right? Some folks are very, you got to show them, right? So they need demonstrations, they need it visualized in some way for them. And so just breaking it down that way and being able to understand people, I think is extremely important to be good in the role. But I think from a communication standpoint too, the biggest thing that I do every day is listen. And so my job is to listen for cues. And because people aren't always going to say 100% of what you need in order to make a decision.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're going to give you those bits and pieces and you got to be able to put it together. So that is very important. And I kind of have an advantage because my mom's a shrink. And my aunt, who passed away not too long ago, is a shrink. And my uncle is a shrink. So we kind of have, that dynamic anyway.
Yeah.
Thanksgivings are fantastic. Lots of in-depth discussion about Freudian theory and Jungian theory. So that kind of helped me out a little bit too in that space.
Yeah, that's good. I'm just thinking, I think to be an effective leader in any role it's really important to understand the person, the character of the person, and create an environment that they can succeed. And that's a lot of psychology. It's a lot of relationship, a lot of listening, a lot of observing. And, it's so important for your security role as well. It's like since we're excelling as a software vendor, we deal with this whole legacy software situation, which is one of the things we ran into in December and January this year. And getting companies to upgrade their legacy software is a challenge, and it's got its risks, right, of staying on it. But there's a lot of the business leaders are dependent on oftentimes those legacy software applications, and having the CISO or somebody from the security team talk to them about, no, we need to upgrade, we need to switch it out. That's not an easy conversation sometimes. They've got to use it to run their business, to do their job, to get paid, keep the business running. So there's a lot of, I think, psychology involved in getting them to, listen to you and trust you. So,
I think there's only two industries that operate in more archaic systems than finance, and that would be insurance and, believe it or not, nuclear.
oh God, yes.
Because you just don't want to touch those systems, right? You're not
Yeah.
trying to install service packs and upgrades on things that control nuclear power rods.
Right.
Right? So,
Right.
and I think, between the three of us, mainframes just work. You can't even argue that there's, especially for financial transactions and for insurance, mainframes just work. It's hard to argue against it, right? But it does represent a technology challenge. And a security challenge, being able to ensure that that engine that's running is as impervious to attack as possible. And on the back end, be able to monitor and watch every single facet of what that piece of technology is doing when it wasn't designed to give you those outputs. I think those are the two factors that really make it difficult for CISOs in those particular industries. There's a couple of others like manufacturing and stuff that'll use legacy systems too, but
Yeah.
I think it's hard to argue with the business when they say, hey, this just works. And building something new for the same purpose would be ridiculously expensive. And in a lot of cases, that is true. So
Yeah, I guess it comes down to the security and what the risk of that asset, of the information asset that you have, that you're working with and storing and like manipulating whatever that within that application. So I know it's a tough role.
And it really is about the visibility, I think, more than anything else. When you look at a lot of these legacy systems, like I said, they weren't created for, like, there was no such thing as a security operations center, right? When Cray machines were put into production, or when AS400s were put into production. But now you need to be able to watch every facet, because the anomalies that you can detect in that system's operation help you understand if something's happening that shouldn't be, right? And those systems require a lot of lateral movement for compromise. So you need to be able to watch lateral movement across the enterprise. And so you have to be savvy enough to create programming teams with that level of expertise to help create those watchers and those markers to be able to feed them into your system. So like all of our core operations feed into our SIM, right? And we have markers to help us detect anomalies. We use AI software to also help us correlate data and be able to kind of put 2 and 2 together and 4 and 4 together when necessary, so that we can stay ahead of those things. And I think that's really important to do.